Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dirt and the Divine. I am here. This is Krisha Young, and I am here with my dear friend and fellow goddess, Kerry Sutras. Hi, Kerry. How are you?
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me on your show.
Oh.
And trust me, the love is returned. I am feeling your divineness. We are just talking about right now, if you guys are listening to this or seeing it, Krisha is looking like Athena, the goddess Athena right now. There's this beautiful glow about the way she shows up. I'm loving every minute of it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I am so excited for today's conversation. So the question really that we're going to open this up with is, hey, women of color, are you being judged by your booty? And this is something that's super passionate to you, Kerry. You are a certified intimacy and relationship coach, and you are today going to be talking to us about this very real problem that women of color or melanated women experience, right? Like there's a lot of trauma associated with this that not a lot of people know about. And I'm so glad that, I've met you and we did a clubhouse together a little while ago, and then reconnected. And I'm very, very excited to have you bring this really important topic to the, listeners and viewers of the Dirt and the Divine, because, this is really, it's kind of a big deal, right? Um,
It so is,
yeah.
and I'm so grateful for the platform and for us to have these conversations, because it really is a space that we need to have a lot more dialogue around. And what I'm exactly talking about is, as a woman of color, I am a Black woman who comes from West Indian descent, which is the Caribbean islands. And with that showing up and how I am in my Black body, I am carrying with me just innately some ancestral realms of trauma that have come out of just the idea of our colonial space and how we have been seen as women of color.
Yeah.
And a part of that also is we have a history of slavery, of maybe what's the word I'm looking for? Just the practice of going through colonialism that has shaped the way that women of color stand in their sexuality. And this can be also affected from, a cultural standpoint, as well as, the church and the way that we are Christianized and how that stands up. All of these different factors create a way that Black women in particular, or women of color, are seen in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and the way we also experience sexuality.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm so grateful that you are bringing this really important topic to the conversation, because it's not something that you hear talked about at the dinner table, right? Um, and there is a massive sexual awakening happening everywhere, where people are starting to realize that there's a lot of toxicity in this particular topic. Just across the board,
Mhm.
right? And a lot of censorship for like weird reasons or whatever, right? But we have like a very big issue here across,
Yes.
right? So let's talk a little bit more. So thank you for bringing this to our attention. So let's talk a little bit more then, like, about the reasons why this is impacting melanated women. Like what's the history? You mentioned colonialism and about the church and things like that. Like, so what kind of things, what were women being, or are women being judged for, and how does that show up for them?
Let's break it down.
Yeah.
Uh, there are many different facets to this space and this issue. But where it actually started, I believe, is as we have been in our experience of being women. You mentioned something that I think is very important to bring up, that the very idea of womanhood has always been a space since the agricultural age, The second we figured out at around, say, 11,005 BC, that we could actually grow things in the land and stay put for a while, it changed the dynamic of how we have stood in womanhood, because there was then a real value to starting to claim the land. And with having to claim the land, that also meant that you would have to know, you'd have to have people, sorry, let's start there. You have to have people to work that land that you're claiming.
Right.
And it helps that if all the people who are claiming the land are of the same parentage, that adds some added bonus, because then you know who you can pass that land down to. So these are one of the inceptions or reasons for the inceptions of the colonial system, and why there's been this spread where land started to have value. And as that spread happened, women became almost commodified in that space, because we're the ones that have got to bring those other bodies along.
Right.
And then as that age grew, workers and labor became an even bigger pronunciation. And hence the slave trade, the Middle Passage, where we had bodies being brought over from Africa and transported all over the world. And to even be able to be in a trade like that, there has to be a disassociation to the idea of your humanity, of being actually human.
Yeah.
And so that is where the inception for Black women in particular, and other women who were enslaved, because Indigenous women were also enslaved of local spaces, especially in North America, or even Southern American women who were Indigenous, they too would have been enslaved. They show up not being even considered human. Yeah. So the value of the woman was taken down to chattel, meaning that you were considered property.
Yeah.
And while that is the experience of women in general, there has been this particular disassociation for women of color in real time. And we're still working to find the space where we can actually be viewed as human. And so what that has done is caused a separation of our sense of self and our sense of our sexuality. Imagine what it would have been for my ancestors when they had children. For them, having children might have meant that that child could have been sold into slavery. So what would be that mental discourse that would have to happen to a woman as she would separate herself from the space of her body?
Right.
And the progeny of her body.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I believe that we are still dealing with this aftermath of how that came into play. And then let's add in the secondary space of once freedom was gotten, or, you know, that expansion of freedom being granted, the Black woman was still considered less than human, less than a bit. And I would even argue we're still working into that space. Yeah. We are now objectified in that we show up with our big booties and our voluptuous shape, which is now something that you see everywhere on TV, or you'll see it being, you know, glorified with women getting butt injections and those kinds of things. But the reclamation of it being the space of ours is not something that's well regarded or looked at.
Right. Yeah. It's like, so it's still viewed as property.
It is.
There's no human behind that booty. There's no human behind that shape, that familiar shape, or how the movements that come with. I think when we talked about before, you mentioned something about rap videos and things like that, right?
Yes, and I love that you brought that up, because it's real. What has happened is the natural beings of our bodies and the shape of it has been taken now into a space that is completely objectified, where and as our bodies were not considered sovereign, we as Black women didn't have that right. It's now been put on a world stage to be ogled and looked at. And yet the Black woman who it is just their natural state of being has been told that it's not theirs to be able to be in. We also, from a cultural standpoint, many of us are raised in the church, and
Right.
many of us are Christianized to think that being sexual is not necessarily our right. We're not allowed to be over sexual, and we're not allowed to be expressive in our sexuality because Black girls are considered fast. You know, there's this idea that because we have these images out there of what we look like when you see a rap video and the, you know, the words that we're called with it, that's just our natural way of being. And then yet we receive this conflicting message on the other side that tells us that, you know, good girls, being church girls, being desirable, that is absolutely not the way of being. So there's this very big dissidence that sits in the way of how to be a woman of color that stands up versus how to be, just be. How do we be in our sexuality in a way that is comfortable for us? And that's a big space where I find for the women that I work with quite a bit, that we have this very big disconnect. Many women don't feel comfortable being sexual. Many women don't really want to, you know, own their bodies because we may have bigger hips and bigger booties.
Yeah.
And so we're shy in showing that in a way that shows up for themselves.
Yeah, like how confusing, right? Like it's like, you know, you're fed and conditioned these messages that you are either, you know, this church going, you know, chaste woman, you know, or you are a booty shaking rap star, and there just doesn't seem to be anything in between there, is what you're saying, right? You know, and either way, like there would be a disconnect to the body because, you know, a woman who is questioning this in any you know, anywhere would be experiencing this like, wait a minute, but I don't identify with these caricatures. Like they're almost caricatures of, you know, roles that women are forced to play because of the reasons that you've already said. And, you know, and then from there, it's like the shame that comes with wanting to, you know, be more sexual and sensual, but without having the backlash or the label.
Absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head. So brilliantly put. Another piece to this is that for the Black woman, I can speak to this one very profoundly. There's also our other go-to, which is that we are to stand as the angry Black woman.
Right.
You know,
yeah.
Black women are not allowed a lot of dichotomy. We're not allowed to be sensitive and soft. It's not necessarily a space when we think about Black women. Normally we think about the strong woman that, you know, does everything for everybody. And that idea of us being able to be in our softness, it's really not something that even as Black women, we are drilled into. I can tell you, Krisha, like from the beginning of my existence, I was thinking about this the other day. I remember my mother coming to me when I was 5 years old, and I was just about to start kindergarten 4 years old, because I was junior kindergarten at the time. And I remember my mother going to me, Kerry, you are a Black girl. That by volition, that means that you are a woman and you are Black. It means you are going to have to work twice as hard to accomplish anything that you do in this world. And I remember looking at my mom and just blinking and going, I'm only 4, like what?
Yeah.
Right? But these are the talks that Black women have with their daughters. And we are ingrained in this space of having to know that our positioning in the world is just different. That it means that we've got to stand a little bit harder. We're going to have to work a little bit more intensely to get the same results. And that's ingrained from the time we begin. And so can you imagine when we start to stand up and start to feel sexual and start to be willing to date, how that perception translates into the way we are seen and perceived?
Yeah. How it would be incredibly confusing. So I have a question for you on what you just said. Because you have daughters, right? And like, did you give them that same message?
You know what? Absolutely. It's the reality of that message is that unfortunately we are still breaking down these barriers or these preconceived notions. And the reality and the truth of it is that for us to stand up as Black people in general, there are these barriers. And so, yes, my daughters even were given the understanding that you're Black and the world is going to perceive you a certain way. That is a given. However, in that space, I also really worked on them understanding the divinity of their Black bodies, that they are the beginnings of the universe if you can conquer and master your wounds, master your sexuality, that your sexuality is a powerhouse for how that perception of how you show up in the world is going to be mitigated. And that's where that confidence can come from, not necessarily from that space of fear. Understanding that the perceptions may be different is one thing, and that awareness is one thing. But when you stand in sovereignty, which I believe starts from understanding your sexuality, that starts from understanding the power that your body wields, then it's a game changer. And that's the message that I try to give women of color.
Mm-hmm. So it's like a level of empowerment around understanding that there are these cultural shackles, but if you know who you are, and knowing who you are includes understanding your sexual energy,
yes,
then you can decide how to handle when these kinds of prejudices and things like that, come up. And, there's an argument here in terms of like the ancestral stuff, right? Like, how do we stop this? And what I was thinking when you were telling me that story about your mom and stuff was, what if we stopped telling our daughters, like, that's how the world is, right? And we started telling them like something different.
I love that space, and I really embrace that concept. I do.
Yeah.
However,
I hear a button there.
yes, because
you're like, reality check, Krisha.
Is as and why I'm loving that we get to have this conversation is because I get to tell you from my perspective and how I have to view the world.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we have to do as people of color is prep our children for the truth of this world. It is not all roses for us, and we are not the very right now, the very system is the system. And while we are making strides against it, it would be to my detriment and my children's detriment and my legacy's detriment to not equip them with the real tools, all of the tools that they need to be able to navigate this world. And with that, I can give them these added abilities, right? Because I believe that this awareness is one of the things that is going to offer the space of healing, that is going to offer the shift that we are sensing and coming into. But the reality is that it's a shift that is gradually happening.
Yeah.
We just ended up, going through the trials that we have. We just found those 215 indigenous bodies in, BC, in Canada, if you're listening to this over the world. We are still in the throes of of racism and anti-Black racism, and the sediments of that are very strong and prevalent. And I would not be doing them a justice to not offer them all of the truths of this being.
Right. Yeah. So it's taking the head out of the sand and talking about the reality, the shadow, the dirt,
Right.
Of what's really, so that is actually a dirt and the divine conversation actually
Right.
had with your daughters, right? Because it's like, listen, like this is the reality of the world that you've been born into, it's redonkulous, and we're doing our best to try to change it, which is these kinds of conversations, right? And
Absolutely.
many conversations like this happening all over the place, because it's raising that awareness and shedding the ignorance, right? And ignorance being the unknown, right? And ignorance being like ignorant, and it's derogatory or derivative term, but also, hey, guess what? Here's how we change it.
You've
Here's
got
how
it.
we change it. Because there's like there's one thing when it's like the world is going to be hard for you, and so just deal, versus listen, babe, here's how it is. Here's the reality. And you are a divine being, and you get to choose, right? How you respond.
Well, and further to it, I have taught my children that that their sexuality and claiming their sexuality is rebellion, that it's revolution.
It is revolution, yeah.
Right? It's revolution.
Yeah.
That one of the best ways to actually show up and stand out in this colonial system is to offer yourself this opportunity to feel into your body, is the opportunity to claim your sexuality in the way that you are choosing to be in your sexuality. That your divineness showing up in the space is a direct hit to how we have been taught that we are to be in this space. That in itself to me is rebellion. That's how we change it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a revolution. It's a new way of thinking. And whenever even ourselves, when we do mindset work or whatever on our own selves, when we are doing that, what do we hit up against? Resistance with our own selves, right? So like it's hard. It's like turning a ship with a paddle, right? Within our own selves, when we are working on this level of, I mean, there's so many layers to this. Like, of course, it's going to take some time, and consistency in the messaging in order for women across the board and men to understand that this is not healthy, like, and that there's a new narrative that we are able to program into our neural pathways at a collective level, right, in order to shift the mindset around these prejudices. And so like for me, what I believe with this kind of work is I believe in doing it at the individual level, right? And so rather than like working on a group of people, I like working on the individual, because then that individual can like one person can impact hundreds, right? Through just their own knowledge and understanding and all of that. And so this is the work that you do, right? So it must be really interesting to work with your clients, because you're not only, I mean, I guess it's kind of the same for me too, but your work is different in a way, because you're dealing with this level of cultural collective consciousness that is like so ancient and so deep and so toxic, and yet so accepted as normal, that like it's very deep in the DNA, right? And then you just like, it's layer on top of layer, and then you layer the woman's like own individual trauma, like anything that she had experienced personally.
Mm. You hit the nail on the head. It's a very um, in-depth way, or in-depth practice that I move through my women with. And normally it's interesting. One of the ways culturally that we have always been is women of color have gathered. It has been our natural way is to be in community. And so for us, communal healing is a very epigenetic space of understanding. And what I have always found, Kresha, that is so powerful, like even last night, I was privy to offer some space in a group of women of color, and we came together, and it was like a coming home. It was a knowing where we all just tapped into our ends of our ancestral lines. And what a soothing, healing, beautiful dynamic emerged.
Oh yeah.
And it was in that ideal space that we were able to move through some trauma. And we did it from some very cultural ancient rituals that were conducive for where we were practicing some very Afrocentric knowing. And what I've found is that from a space like that, then I can bring a person individually, and
Yeah.
we can start to unravel. So it's almost like I'm working from a V. So
Yeah.
when I get the group dynamic, I get a group of women. We work on that, and dealing with the ancestral stuff allows us to channel it down a little bit to the individual stuff. So it's just a little bit on the other side of the way that we would do that. And I find that seems to work much, very effectively. I won't say it's the only way I work, but that seems to be a major one. Because also, you know, when we talk about sexuality in particular, you know, we go into that primal space of sexuality. All of our cultural layers, all of the programming that we've been taught, sometimes it helps to start in that group setting because it's such a personal thing. So people like to get an idea of that comfortable, you know, get a little comfortable, get to touch it a little bit before they're able to come in one-on-one and build that trust with you.
Yeah,
so I find that works.
absolutely. Yeah, like I remember when I first started this journey healing my own sexual wounds and you know, paradigms and stuff. For me, it was going into like goddess circles and goddess events, you know, like that's what they were called, right? Like goddess yoga and things like that. And it was like there is, you know, women across the board really benefit from gathering. Like 100%. So, you know, anyone listening, like gather, because what happens is it's the whole like, oh my God, yes. It's the identification, and it is the she went first, you know, concept, right? And so these women are looking at you going, oh my God, like I could never be like that confident. And you're like, dude, I wasn't always like this. And here was my journey. And then that gives women permission. Like it's like the work that we are doing gives women permission to unravel all of this stuff, right? But for you and for me, like we needed examples of women before us, and that's what circles and gathering does, right? And I mean, that's been happening for centuries. Like it's just fallen off the radar because of a lot of the things that you were talking about, and also because women started having to go to work, and there's no time. There's no time. We don't have time. We're taking care of the kids. We're working full time. We're doing all the blah, 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 blah. There's no time to gather. Well, guess what? You got to make time, because that is where the healing comes. What's that?
Anything we value, we will find the time for. And it's also like, for me, I think you've said it so beautifully, that there is that forgetting, right? Because we've gotten so busy in this truth and reality, we've forgotten that this is the desire of ours. I believe that the divine feminine in particular, when you are focused on that portion and connecting
Yeah.
back into the divineness
Yeah.
of your divine feminine, it's such a space to thrive when
Yes.
you get to connect in with other energies that
Yeah.
feel are embrace that, right?
Well,
So I'm
exactly.
with you on it.
Yeah, and I was going to say that because I know there's probably some women listening going like, well, last time I gathered with women, all they did was like bitch and gossip and talk bad about
Right?
each other and all that. So I'm really glad that you said the divine feminine, because that's not what happens. And there is a very different grouping of women, right? Like there's the catty and the gossipy and the BS weird stuff that we see like on reality shows like Housewives of, right? It's like, oh God, that is so not at all what happens in divine women's circles. In divine women's circles, it is all about allowing everything to be there
Come
and
far.
having a
Come in.
very, very, very safe space emotionally to be able to recognize the not just the pain, but also what's available on the other side, right? Because it's not just about trauma and pain, it's also about like the juiciness that is available to us when we understand what sexual energy is. And that is my next question. So why don't we talk about what we mean by that, right? Because I think people hear the word sex and they think it's just like, you know, and it's not. Like, I mean, it can be, and it does definitely include like bow chicka wow wow,
Yeah,
but
right. Love you so much. Go on.
but it's not just that, right? Like, okay,
Right.
so what do we mean by sexual energy? Like, what do you want to kick us off with that one?
I love this, and yes, I do.
Yeah.
What you are mentioning is all of it.
Yeah.
Sexual energy is, I believe, that place where pleasure meets the universe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, where that sense of knowing, whether it is that you have reached your climax, meaning that you've come to orgasm, or you're in just that height of the place of surrender where you're just letting go into that ultimate pleasure. It's no coincidence that when you get there, most of us go, oh God, Jesus, amen, Lord. There's a reason why you go there, because it's about going to church.
Yeah.
You are connecting into something higher than that space of just simply being in pleasure in your body.
Yeah.
And that's what we mean by the sexual energy. I believe it's the conduit into the ether, into all this other beautiful divineness of knowing what the universe is.
100%. And yes, I love that. Ooh, that's so good. Yes, because you're right. Like it is, oh God, it's that
Right.
feeling, right? And so let's bring like it, we bring it out of the bedroom though, because we're not talking about in the bedroom, but yes, it can be. But it's also like when you said that and I had that shiver, that's it. It's the recognition, it's the shiver, it's the whoo, you know, that's the chunking in of the divine within the body, right? And we feel that. That's the joy, that's the expansion, that's the juiciness and the deliciousness of life. And it's the energy. And I think like it's labeled as sexual energy because it's the thing that's the kinship.
Right. Love that. Go. You got
Right?
a great word. Got it. Yeah.
Kinship. So you have an orgasm in actual physical sex and you're like, oh God. Or you go to nature and like you're just like, oh God, nature. It's the same thing. Or you're having an amazing conversation with an amazing person and you're like connecting on all these levels and you're just like, holy shit, I'm getting body shivers. It's the same thing.
I love this. And I love you bringing the awareness that it doesn't have to just be in one form. And you are 100% on the money, that is the exchange of this energy, that it can be channeled into so many different aspects of our reality and truth. When we are in our sexual energy, it is a vessel, a way to tap in that makes it alive and real, and we can access it fairly easily. But what it is recognizing that this can be channeled and taken into even much more of an expansion. Like when you said, I know I get shivers. I've got this beautiful tree in my backyard. Her name is Rebecca. I've named her Rebecca. And I will go out to Rebecca and just give her a hug.
Yeah.
Me and Rebecca are friends. And
Yeah.
she just gives me that love. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
I
And it's
do. I actually really
right,
know what you mean.
right.
Yeah.
It's delicious energy. And what
Yeah.
that's come from too is that there's a knowing that because I have this vitality in my body, because I can access these realms of pleasure for myself in myself, I also recognize it in other things, in other spaces, in other forms, and in other ways.
Yeah.
Your sexual energy, your sexual divinity taps you into the aliveness of the world around you as well.
It's bang on. Your sexual aliveness taps you into the energy of what's around you.
Yes.
Totally.
Yes. I always say it's a battery. When a woman really has the option to experience herself. And so part of one of the things that I'm such an advocate for, and especially when I'm working with women who, you know, have had their traumatic spaces or are dealing with these cultural ends or just want to tap into understanding what we're talking about, I really recommend a self-pleasure practice. I always believe it's interesting because by nature, women are programmed to believe that our bodies are not for us. You
Yeah.
know, when you think about it, you are trained that, you know, you're going to meet your partner and, you know, you're going to get married or you're going to partner up and he's going to like lavish you and love you and you're going to love him. And with that, we're taught that our bodies aren't really for us. You know, we're supposed to save ourselves for marriage or save ourselves for somebody else. And I always wonder and offer to my clients and to the people I work with, what would it be? How powerful are you when you learn to make love to yourself first?
Yeah.
You are a temple. This body that you have been given is this beautiful temple. You've won the lottery of life. You think about how many millions of sperm are ejaculated into a woman's cervix and the fight that begins. And normally it's just that one sperm that meets the egg. You are a divine gift. So if this temple that was created is there for you, you should be able to explore it and know its power. So that's always where I begin, is learn to touch on yourself, learn
Yeah.
to love on yourself.
I love that. And then the deeper work that you would do, you know, is whatever traumas might come up or the shame or the stories or whatever, right? From that, right? Because like I know like for a lot of women, for myself, there was a lot of shame around that and it
Oh,
needed to be healed, right? It needed to be healed in order to be able to do that, which is why you know, being trauma informed such as you are, you're able to walk these women through, like we talked about, you know, not just the individual, but also that collective consciousness around, you know, their bodies and the shame and that imagery. Like I want to loop back before we close off. I want to loop back to what we were talking about at the beginning, right? Because I mean, we could talk about this all day long. Like easily all the time, every day.
right.
And so what do we do about this, right? So we have this like very dysfunctional view of you know, melanated
Mhm.
women and bodies, and it's very deep, it's very old, and you know, so a woman is listening to, or a man even is listening to this and they're like, okay, well, what do we do about it? So
Ah,
what can people start doing about it, not just at an individual level, but also like, you know, just to speak out about it more or to, you know, like to shift the narrative?
one of the things, thank you for asking. I love that. I really advocate for educating yourself. Now that you have an awareness
Yeah.
that this might be a thing, I offer to you to start paying attention and to start maybe educating yourself. There is a book called White Fragility. It's by Robin Dufresne is her last name. And it's a beautiful, beautiful book to understand just how the colonial system has set us up to be in this, in the divides that we have in the way that we perceive things, right?
Yeah.
And when we have knowledge, the knowledge becomes the power.
Yeah.
I also advocate for supporting groups that are already existing and are doing this work. So advocating for the Black Lives Matters groups, if that's where you're feeling your heart to go, find your local groups where we are offering maybe Afrocentric circles for women to be able to show up. I also have a podcast where we talk a lot about, it's called Medicine for the Resistance, where we talk about the ways that we can show up radically differently. And one of the things that we talk often about is being not a good ally. What we really are looking for are for our white counterparts to be good interns. Bring your knowledge, bring the resources, but be also ready to bring us a coffee. Be ready to hear how we need those resources to be accessed and utilized, and really come with that sense of knowing that you're here to support whatever the movement that's already in practice for.
Right.
The struggle that Black people and women and Indigenous folks of color are working on is we need to be able to frontline what those solutions are going to be. And
Right.
they're going to look very different, and they're coming and emerging. But if you can show up in that way,
Yeah.
that's the way that we make radical changes in the way the system exists today.
Wonderful. Well, I hope I've brought some coffee here for you today.
You did. You brought some coffee and all of your deliciousness. I'm loving this space. You have been so amazing, Kresha. Thank you for allowing me to use my voice.
Of course, it's really, really, really important. You know, I'm such an advocate for, you know, shifting the status quo and in the narrative in so many topics. And this is a really important one. So I appreciate you being here and sharing your voice. And you know, we'll put in the show notes like how well, I'll ask you here, and we'll also put it in the show notes. But how can people connect with you if they want to learn more and or work with you even?
If you would like to connect with me, you can find me on Instagram under Kerry Sutras. That's my Instagram handle. You can also find me on my website if you'd like to book into a client connection or have a free session with me. It's kerrysutras.com. I also have a YouTube channel, which is Kerry Sutra TV. And in that space, I give you all the handy tips and tricks around how you can be in your sexuality and how we can also shift this narrative. I really appreciate you for that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Do you have any closing words for our listeners and viewers?
Yeah, I really just want to offer out there, pay attention, feel into that chocolate woman that surrounds you, that is your friend, that is your neighbor. Recognize that in her experience, we are all having an experience. And when you just offer her a kindness, a look, a touch, an understanding that the expression may be different, that acknowledgement is so powerful, because for many of us, we feel unheard. So I appreciate you paying attention.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Oh my gosh, Kerry, this has been really amazing. I really appreciate you bringing this to the awareness and, you know, that like, and having this conversation, because, you know, these are the conversations that we really need to be having now. Because I mean, it's time, like we have to start shifting this now. Like it's ridiculous. Like this is such an old thing that it's not even really part of most people's like heart.
Right.
You
It,
know, it's
it,
just like you said, it's continuously passed down. So it is time to, stop this. And
we're
you,
disrupting. We're
yeah,
disrupting the
yeah,
narrative.
exactly.
I love it.
Yeah.
And thank you for offering your space up to be a part of the disruption. There's something delicious about being rebellious. And
Oh
that's what
yeah.
it felt like. It's juicy and it's wild. We're unwilding. That's
Yeah.
another one of my
Yeah. I love it. I love
wild
it. Wow.
together.
Yes, I love it. I love it. It's all the feminine. Thank you again, Kerry. And thank you to you as well, dear listener and watcher of The Dirt and the Divine. If you have any questions or you want to connect with either Kerry or myself, please do not hesitate. The links will be in the show notes below. If you want to contribute to this conversation, please do by reaching out to either one of us, and we would be more than happy to hear and share what you have to say. Thank you so much, Kerry. Thank you to all of you, and we will see you on the next episode. Thanks, Kerry.
No problem.